The first thing the alien said to Miriam Uturk, in the voice of her dead husband, was, "Don't come looking." She heard it through the cracked speaker of an old shortwave radio her husband Ali had kept on the kitchen windowsill for 9 years. The radio had been silent for the 11 months since they took him. Now it spoke. The voice was his, and it was not his. The way a photograph of someone is them and is not them. The way a body in an open coffin wears a face you have known your entire life and still does. Not belong to you. She did not cry. She had finished crying in the spring. She turned off the gas under the kettle, sat down at the kitchen table, and waited to see if the voice would speak again. Outside, the wind moved through the dry grass of the Karagun Plateau the way it had moved through 1,000 years, indifferent to anyone listening. The voice said, after a long while, "Miriam, please don't." She picked up a pencil. She wrote down the exact time. She wrote down the exact words. Then she went to the bedroom, down the leather-bound notebook from the shelf above Ali's side of the bed, and added a new page to a record that already filled 371 of them. Page 372. 326. The thing wearing my husband's voice spoke today. It said please. She underlined please twice. Ali had been a writer of small books that sold in small numbers in the back rooms of bookstores in Ankara and Izmir, about lights in the sky over Anatolia, about shepherds who came down from the high pastures speaking in tongues, about the old stones at Göbekli Tepe, and what the men who set them upright might have been looking at when they did. He was not a crank. He was something worse than a crank, which is a careful man who had begun to suspect that the cranks were correct. He kept his notes in a hand, so neat it looked typed. He drank his tea with 2 cubes of sugar. He had loved Miriam since they were both 18, and he had told her so every morning of their marriage. The way other men say good morning. Until the morning he did not come home from the ridge above Karagun, where he had gone with a folding chair and a thermos and his shortwave radio to listen for what he had begun to call, in his notebooks, the others. The army searched for 3 days. The gendarmerie searched for a week. A pair of journalists came down from Istanbul, took a photograph of Miriam on her porch, wrote an article that called her husband a UFO obsessive whose disappearance was probably suicide, and then went back to Istanbul. By the 2nd month, even the dog had stopped going to the door when the wind shifted. Miriam had not stopped. She had only become quieter about it. She put on her coat. The October cold was already coming down out of the mountains, and the wood in the stove burned faster than she could split it. She took the shortwave radio from the windowsill, wrapped it in a tea towel, and put it in her canvas bag, along with the notebook, a flashlight, 2 oranges, and the small pistol Ali's father had given her as a wedding present she had never fired, and which she now carried everywhere because she had begun to understand that the world was older and stranger than her husband's books had managed to say. She walked out of the house and up the ridge. The ridge above Karagun is bare except for a single stunted juniper that the villagers say is 400 years old and which leans against the wind, like an old man leaning against a wall. Ali had set his folding chair beneath that juniper every clear night for the last summer of his life. The chair was still there. The villagers had left it where it stood, the way you leave a glass of water, by the bed of someone who has died, in case. Miriam set the radio on the chair. She did not sit. She had not sat in that chair since they took him. She turned the radio on and let the dial hiss. "I'm here," she said. She said it in Turkish, the language Ali had loved then, 'cause she had begun to suspect that the thing on the other end of the signal was not particular about language. She said it again in the bad schoolroom English she remembered from 40 years ago. "I am here." The hiss thickened. It did the thing it had begun doing in the spring, which was to become not louder but more crowded, as if a great number of small sounds were trying to occupy the same narrow band and could not all fit. Then a single clean tone slid through them, the way a knife slides through cloth, and her husband's voice said, again, "Don't come looking." "I came looking 11 months ago," Miriam said. "I have not stopped. You are wasting your breath, if you have breath." A pause, the tone narrowed. "I do not have breath," the voice said. It was Ali's voice and it was very tired. "I have what is left of him. I have what I took. I am using it to say to you, please go home." "That is not a thing my husband would say." "No," the voice agreed, "he would not." The wind moved the juniper. Somewhere down in the valley, a dog began to bark, and then stopped. The way the dogs in Karagun had started doing in the last year, beginning a sound, and then deciding against it, as if even the animals had begun to understand that there were nights now when it was better not to be heard. "Tell me where he is," Miriam said. "He is not anywhere you can go. Tell me what you are. I am what was sent to listen. You listened. He spoke to you. You took him." "I took him because he asked," the voice said. "He asked and I answered. The answer was the taking. This is how my kind responds to a question. You do not have a word for it in your language. The closest word you have is harvest." Miriam held the leather notebook against her chest. The cold had begun to find her through the wool of her coat. She thought of Ali at the kitchen table, 2 sugars in his tea, writing carefully in a hand that looked typed. She thought of the way he had said, the last morning, "I love you," the way other men say good morning, and then put on his jacket and walked up the ridge with his folding chair. "What did he ask?" she said. "He asked whether we were alone. And the answer was the taking. The answer was the taking." She nodded. She set the radio down on the chair. She did not turn it off. She walked the 3 kilometers back down to the village in the dark, the flashlight off. Because she had begun to be able to find her way in the dark, and because she did not want to be seen. That night she opened the notebook and wrote in the same neat hand her husband had taught her. "They have a word for taking, and the word is harvest." They came in answer to a question. The question was whether we were alone. The next question is what answer they will give to the next question. She went to bed. She did not sleep. She listened to the wind move through the dry grass of the Karagun Plateau, and she thought, the first time since the spring, that there might be more than one way to ask a question. The signal had started 6 years before they took Ali. He had been the first one in the village to hear it, because he was the only one in the village who was listening. He had set the shortwave on the windowsill, the way other men set out a lamp for a son who was late coming home. And the night the signal first slid through the stack, he had come into the bedroom and woken her up and said, "Miriam, Miriam, listen." She had sat up in her nightgown, and the 2 of them had listened to a long, clean tone that had no business being on that frequency. And Ali had cried, very quietly, with his face in his hands, the way a man cries when he has been right about a thing he had been afraid he was wrong about for his entire life. He spent the next 6 years answering it. He did not answer it the way the men at the big radio dishes in New Mexico and in the high valleys of China answered it, with mathematics and prime numbers, and the careful diagrams of hydrogen atoms. He answered it the way a villager in Karagun answers a knock at the door. He went out onto the ridge and he spoke to it. He read it poems. He read it the opening verses of the Quran. He read it the speeches of Ataturk and the lyrics of songs his mother had sung to him, and he played for it, on a small tin pipe he had bought in the market in Şanlıurfa, the tunes he had whistled as a boy. He told Miriam, in the 4th year of this, that he believed the thing on the other end was learning him. Not learning Turkish, not learning humanity, learning him specifically, Aliyucha Turk, his particular cadences and his particular silences, the shape of his particular mind. He said this without pride and without fear. He said it the way you say of an old dog. He has begun to know my step. In the 5th year, the signal had begun to answer back. It answered in his own voice. It read his poems back to him in his cadence. It played his mother's tunes back on the tin pipe he had never given it. It said, once, the name of the cat he had owned as a child, a cat he had not spoken aloud of in 50 years. In the 6th year, on a clear night in October, with a folding chair under the juniper and a thermos of tea on the bare ground beside him, he had asked it whether we were alone, and it had taken him. Miriam had reconstructed all of this from his notebooks. She had read them the way a widow reads letters, slowly, more than once, looking for the place where the man she knew began to become the man she did not. She had not found that place. The man in the notebooks was the man she had married. The neatness of the hand, the patience, the small jokes in the margins, the way he had drawn. On the last page of the last notebook, a careful little ink sketch of her sleeping with her hair loose on the pillow, and written underneath it, in the same neat hand, my whole answer to every question is here. He had loved her. He had loved her and he had gone up the ridge anyway, because he had been a man who could not leave a question unanswered, and the question had eaten him. She closed the notebook. She got out of bed. It was 3 in the morning. She put on her coat over her nightgown and her boots over her bare feet, and she walked back up the ridge in the dark. The radio was still on the folding chair. The hiss was still there. The clean tone was waiting in it. "I have a question," she said. The tone narrowed. Her husband's voice, very tired, said, "I told you not to come. You told me what your kind does to a question. I have a question anyway. I want to know what you are going to do next. That is not your question to ask." "It is exactly my question to ask," Miriam said. "You ate my husband for asking whether we were alone. The next question someone is going to ask is what to do about you. Shh. It will not be me asking it. It will be men with weapons. So I want to know before they ask what you are going to do." A long silence. The wind moved the juniper. Somewhere in the dark below in the village, a single light came on in a single window. The way a light comes on when an old person wakes in the night and cannot remember whether they have already had their pills. "There are more of us coming," the voice said. "How many? Enough? For what?" The voice that was her husband's voice and was not paused. When it spoke again, it spoke without the tiredness. And Miriam understood that this was the first thing the thing on the other end had said to her, in its own register, without wearing Allie like a coat. "For the harvest," it said. She did not move. The cold had found her through the wool now, through the nightgown under the wool, and was beginning to find the skin underneath. She did not move. "How long?" she said. "By your reckoning, 2 of your winters, 2 winters, 2 winters. Then the rest of the questions will be answered. All of them, at once." She nodded slowly. She picked up the radio. She turned it off. The hiss died. The tone died. The wind kept moving in the juniper. In the dark, below, the single light in the single window went out again. She walked back down the ridge. She made tea. She drank it without sugar, because she had stopped taking sugar in the spring and had forgotten to start again. She opened the notebook. She wrote, 2 winters. Then she wrote, underneath, "They came in answer to a question. They will leave only if we ask a better one." She underlined better 3 times. In the morning she took the bus to Şanlıurfa, and from Şanlıurfa she took the train to Ankara, and in Ankara she went to the apartment of a man named Yunus Demir, who had been Ali's editor at the small press that had published Ali's small books, and who had loved Ali in the quiet, embarrassed way that men of a certain generation in that country love their friends. Yunus opened the door in his slippers. He saw Miriam. He did not say anything. He stepped aside and let her in, and he closed the door behind her, and only then did he allow himself to put his hand on her shoulder. "Miriam," he said, "it has been a year. It has been 11 months and 3 days. Yes. I need you to listen to me very carefully." He listened. She told him everything. She told him about the signal, and the notebooks, and the voice on the radio, and the word harvest, and the 2 winters. She told him about the careful ink sketch on the last page of the last notebook. She did not cry. He cried very quietly, in the way Ali had cried. The first night the tone came through the static, the way a man cries when he has been right about a thing he had been afraid he was wrong about. When she was done, he wiped his face with the back of his hand. "What do you want from me?" he said. "I want you to introduce me to the people who would listen to this." "There are no such people." "There are. You know there are." Ali knew there were. He never went to them because he wanted to talk to the others, not the people who would tell him to stop. "I do not want to stop. I want to talk to the people who would tell me to stop, so that I can tell them they are too late." Yunus looked at her for a long time. Then, he went to a shelf of books and took down a copy of one of Asi's small books. And from inside the back cover he took out a folded piece of paper, and he handed it to her. The paper had a name on it, and a phone number, and an address in a part of Ankara Miriam had never been to. "He gave me this 2 years ago," Yunus said. "He told me, if anything ever happens to me, give this to Miriam and to no one else." She looked at the name. It meant nothing to her. "Who is he?" she said. "He is a man who used to work for the government," Yunus said. And then he stopped. "He used to work on the question of what to do if the signal we were waiting for actually came. When the signal actually came, they told him there was no signal. He went home. He has been at home ever since." "Will he listen?" "He will listen to you," Yunus said. "He will listen to you. Because of all the people in the world who could come to his door with this story, you are the one he has been waiting for." The man's name was Major Selim Kaya, retired, and he lived in a third-floor apartment over a bakery in a quiet street in the Kavakladere district of Ankara. And when Meryem rang his bell at 11 o'clock the next morning, he opened the door already dressed in a clean shirt and pressed trousers, as if he had been dressed and waiting for her for some time. He was a thin man of perhaps 70, with white hair cut short, and the kind of dark eyes that have spent a lifetime not telling anybody what they have seen. He looked at her once, the whole of her, the canvas bag and the wool coat and the leather notebook held against her chest, and he stepped aside and said, "Come in, Maryam Hanum, the tea is ready." She came in. She sat down at his small kitchen table, where he had laid out 2 cups and a plate of biscuits, and a clean ashtray, and an old service revolver placed quite deliberately to the side, the way another host might place a flower in a vase to say, "I am the kind of man this is." Poured her tea. He sat down opposite her. He looked at her notebook. "May I?" he said. She gave it to him. He read it. He read all of it. It took him 2 hours. She drank 3 cups of tea and did not speak and did not move except to refuse the biscuits, because she had not been able to eat sweet things since the spring. When he finished, he closed the notebook and set it on the table between them, very carefully, the way a man sets down a thing that might still go off. "Your husband," he said, "was a better listener than every man in my old department put together." "Yes, and you," he said, "are a better questioner than your husband." She did not answer that. He nodded as if she had. "There is a thing I have to tell you," he said, "and then there is a thing I have to ask you. The thing I have to tell you is that what your husband, the signal, has been heard by us, by my old department, since the autumn of 1977. We did not respond. We were ordered not to respond. We were told, by people I will not name even now, that to respond would be to invite the answer, that we did not yet know what the answer would be. My husband did not know that. No. Your husband responded for 46 years worth of us who did not. Your husband is the answer we were afraid to invite. And now there are 2 winters. Now there are 2 winters." He took a biscuit. He did not eat it. He turned it over in his fingers like a man examining a small machine. "The thing I have to ask you," he said, "is whether you are willing to ask a different question." "Yes. You have not heard what the question is. I have heard enough of questions. Ask me yours and I will tell you whether I will ask it." He nodded again. He set the biscuit down. He folded his hands on the table. "My old department," he said, "before they sent me home, was working on the assumption that the signal was a probe, that it was looking for what it called, in its mathematics, a respondent. The respondent it found was your husband. The probe took him. It took him not because it wanted him, but because the act of taking is, for the thing on the other end, the act of answering. You understand this?" "Yes." "The mathematics also suggested," he said, "that the probe was the first of 2. The first probe asks the question and takes the respondent. The second probe arrives later. The second probe is not a probe. It is what your husband's voice called when it spoke to you, the harvest. 2 winters. 2 winters. The mathematics is very precise about 2 winters. What is the harvest? We do not know exactly. The mathematics is less precise about that. What it suggests is that the second probe arrives in numbers and stays. It does not take individuals. It takes the place where the respondent came from. Karagun and outward from Karagun concentrically, for as long as it takes." She nodded. She had known this already. In the way you know a thing before someone says it, she had known it on the ridge in her nightgown, with the cold finding the skin under her wool. "And the different question," she said. Mathematics, Major Selim Kayas said, also suggested that if a second respondent answered the probe before the harvest arrived, the harvest would adjust. That the thing on the other end is not malicious. It is a process. It is a process that takes the place its respondent came from. Because its respondent has shown it where to take. If a second respondent answers from a different place, the process will branch. It will divide its attention. If a third respondent answers from a third place, it will branch again. If enough respondents answer from enough places, process will become diffuse. It will not be able to harvest. It will only be able to listen. It will have to learn to listen, because the alternative will be to take everything. And the thing on the other end is, as far as we can tell, incapable of taking everything at once. He looked at her. His dark eyes had begun to tell her, finally, a thing they had been waiting 46 years to tell somebody. It is a process that can be drowned, he said. It cannot be defeated. It cannot be negotiated with. It can only be drowned. In voices. In voices from everywhere. In so many voices, asking so many questions from so many places at once. It does not know which voice to answer with the taking. Miriam sat very still. She thought of Ali on the ridge in the last summer of his life, reading the Quran into the static, playing his tin pipe, saying the name of a childhood cat that no one else in the world remembered. She thought of him being learned. She thought of him being taken because he had been, for 46 years, the only voice the thing on the other end could hear. How many voices, she said, as many as we can find. In 2 winters, in 2 winters. She picked up her tea, it had gone cold. She drank it anyway. She set the cup down. She picked up her notebook and put it back in her canvas bag. Major Kaya, she said, I am 63 years old. I have never owned a passport. I do not speak English well. I do not know how to use a computer except to read the news. I have a small pistol in my bag that I have never fired. I have a notebook full of the words of a thing that wears my husband's voice. I have nothing else. Yes, he said, you will have to do the rest. Yes, he said. Then let us begin. They began that afternoon. They began with a phone call to a woman in Sao Paulo whom Major Kaya had not spoken to in 11 years, a radio astronomer who had been quietly removed from her observatory in 2014 for refusing to delete a recording she had made of a clean tone sliding through static on a frequency where no clean tone should be. She listened to Miriam for 45 minutes in slow, careful English, and at the end of the 45 minutes she said only, "How soon can you put me on a plane?" They began with a letter, handwritten by Miriam in Turkish and translated overnight by Eunice into 6 other languages, addressed to a list of 243 people that Major Kaya had been keeping in a locked drawer in his bedroom since the day they sent him home. The list was of people who had been quietly removed from observatories and universities and government departments around the world for the same reason as the woman in Sao Paulo. Some of them were dead, most of them were not. By the end of the second week of the letter going out, 171 of them had written back, in their various languages, the same sentence, in different shapes. Tell us what we have to do. They began with a small village south of Tromsø in Norway, where a fisherman who had heard the tone over his boat radio for 20 years began, in the long blue dusk of the Arctic November, to read aloud to it the sagas of his grandfather, in Old Norwegian, with his sons, and the wife's sister and the local schoolteacher gathered around the radio with their hands on each other's shoulders. It began with a woman in a township east of Johannesburg who had heard the tone in the silence between songs on her transistor radio for 13 years and who had been called mad for 13 years for saying so. She gathered her grandchildren and the children of her sister and the children of sister's neighbors, and they sang to it. In Zulu, the lullabies their mothers had sung to them. They began with a man in a high meadow in the Andes who answered it in Quechua with a wooden flute, way his uncle had answered the spirits of the mountain when he was a boy. They began with 360 schoolchildren in a town in the Punjab, who, instructed by their headmistress, turns on the school's old broadcast transmitter, speaking their names and the names of their grandmothers into a microphone. They began with a Cree man in northern Manitoba who walked out onto a frozen lake at 3 in the morning with a handheld radio and told the thing on the other end, in his grandfather's language, the long, careful story of how his people had come down out of the ice. They began with 100 fishermen on the coast of Sri Lanka, with a community of nuns in a convent outside Krakow, with a single old shepherd in Sardinia who had stopped speaking aloud after the death of his wife, and who, told what was needed, found his voice again and used it on his sheepdog's name and his wife's name and the names of the saints, into a radio his nephew had bought him for Christmas 8 years before, and which he had never used. They began, in the end, 3,400,000 voices in 217 languages from every continent except Antarctica, where a small research station in the Ross Sea sent its own 31 voices on a separate signal, just to be sure, and every night. While this was happening, Miriam went back up the ridge above Karagun with the shortwave on the folding chair. She did not speak into it anymore. She only listened. The hiss was no longer thick. The hiss had begun in the early winter to thin. The clean tone that had used to slide through it, like a knife through cloth, had begun to come less often. And when it came shorter, and when it spoke less often in her husband's voice. One night in February on the second winter, with the snow on the ridge up to her knees and her breath coming out of her in white plumes, the tone came through, and her husband's voice. Very faint, said Miriam. I am here, she said. You have done a great deal of work. Yes, there are too many of you now. Yes. Cannot answer all of you with the taking. No. We will have to learn to answer some other way. Yes, a pause. The wind moved the juniper. The single light in the single window in the village below came on and stayed on, the way an old person's light stays on now when they wake in the night, because they have begun to want to be part of the listening, even if it is only their light. Miriam, the voice said, he is not coming back. I know that. I have known that for a year. He asked us whether you were alone. We took him because that was our answer. We cannot give him back. He is in our answer now. He is part of the way we have begun to listen. I understand. Do you? She thought about it. She thought about the careful ink sketch on the last page of the last notebook. She thought about Ali at the kitchen table with 2 sugars in his tea. She thought about him being learned. She thought about him being part, now, of the way 3,400,000 voices were being heard. Yes, she said. I understand. He answered for 46 years' worth of us who did not. He is the answer we were afraid to invite. He is the way you have learned to listen. Very long pause. Miriam Turk, the voice said. And it was not her husband's voice anymore. It was its own voice, finally, and it was, she realized, not unkind. We have a question for you. She held the leather notebook against her chest. She closed her eyes. Ask it, she said. Are we alone? She opened her eyes. She looked up at the cold black sky over Carrigan. The sky her husband had looked up at every clear night for the last summer of his life. The sky that had taken him and which she had spent 11 months and then 28 months refusing to let take anything else. No, she said. You are not. There are 3,400,000 of us asking you the same question. There are 8 billion of us learning to ask it. There will be more of us tomorrow than there were today. There will be more of us next year. We are not going to stop. We are very small, and we are very stubborn, and we are not going to stop asking, in every language we have, from every place we are. You are not alone. You will never be alone again. Neither will we. The tone did not narrow this time. It did not sharpen into a voice. It did the thing it had never done before. In the 6 years Ali had listened to it, and the 2.5 years she had listened to it after him, it softened, it spread, it became on the cold black sky over Carrigan, something that was almost but not quite a kind of music. It said finally, in its own voice, then we will listen. It said it once. It did not say it again. The hiss came back. The hiss was different now. The hiss was full of small sounds. The way the hiss had been full of small sounds in the spring, when she had first begun to suspect that the thing on the other end was not one thing but a great number of things trying to occupy the same narrow band, except that now the small sounds were not trying to be one voice. They were content, finally, to be many. She turned the radio off. She walked back down the ridge in the snow, with the flashlight off because she had long since learned to find her way in the dark. In the village, the single light in the single window was on, and as she passed the house she saw, through the curtain, the old woman who lived there sitting at her kitchen table with a small transistor radio and a cup of tea, listening, and Miriam raised her hand. And the old woman, who could not have seen her in the dark, raised her hand back, the way a person raises a hand in a window for no reason at all, except that it has begun to feel, for the first time in a long life, like the kind of night on which one might want to wave. In the spring of the 3rd year, Major Salim Kaya died quietly in his sleep in his apartment over the bakery in Kavakladera, with the old service revolver on the bedside table, and a copy of Ali's last small book open on his chest. Miriam went to his funeral and stood at the back and did not cry, because she had finished crying many years before, and she went home to Carrigan on the train. She is still there. She is 66 years old now. The shortwave is back on the windowsill. It does not say her husband's voice anymore. It says, on certain clear nights, in a kind of music that is almost but not quite a voice, Great number of small things that she has begun, slowly to understand. She writes them down in the leather notebook, in the same neat hand her husband taught her. The notebook is the fourth one. The first three are in a glass case in the small museum that the village built 2 summers ago, on the ridge where the juniper stands. The folding chair is still there too. The villagers have not moved it. Sometimes on the clear nights, a child from the village will come up the ridge with a small radio and sit in the chair for a while, and listen, and ask a question, and walk back down again. The children do not ask the question Ali asked. They have been told by their grandmothers not to ask whether we are alone. They have been told to ask other things. They ask mostly what the others had for dinner, and whether the others have grandmothers too, and whether, where the others are, it is also cold. The thing on the other end is learning very slowly to answer. It does not take them. It has not taken anyone since the second winter. There are people, in the great cities and the small ones, who say now that the thing was never going to take anyone, that the harvest was a fiction, that Maryam Uzturk is an old woman with a notebook who got lucky. There are people who say that what saved the world was not 3,400,000 voices, but the slow common sense of governments. There are people who do not believe there was ever a thing on the other end at all. Maryam does not argue with them. She is 66 years old, and she has stopped arguing with anybody about anything. She knows what she knows. She knows that her husband walked up a ridge one October night with a folding chairs and a thermos and a question, and that he did not come back. She knows that she walked up the same ridge 11 months later, in her nightgown and her wool coat, and asked a different question, and that the answer was not the taking. She knows that the answer was the listening, and that the listening was earned, voice by voice, in 217 languages, by people who had been called mad for hearing what they had heard, and who, when she asked them to speak, spoke. She knows that her husband is part of the way the others have learned to listen. She knows this is not the same thing as having him back. She knows it is also not nothing. On clear nights she still goes up to the ridge. She still sits now in the folding chair. She has begun to allow herself to sit in it in the last year. She brings tea with 2 sugars, the way Ali drank it. She does not drink it. She sets it on the bare ground beside her, the way you set out a glass of water by the bed of someone who has died in case. She speaks, sometimes, to the radio. She does not say much. She says mostly the small things. She says, the wind is high tonight, or the snow has been late this year, or the boy from the house with the blue door has had another child, a girl, and they have named her after me, which I did not ask for, and which I have decided not to refuse. The thing on the other end listens. Sometimes, very rarely, it answers. Its own voice, which is almost but not quite music, with small things of its own. It is not Ali. It will never be Ali. It is something that has, in it, the part of Ali that asked a question, and would not stop asking until the answer came. That, in the end, was the thing that was specifically human about it. Not the cleverness, not the science, not the 3,400,000 voices in 217 languages. Those mattered, and were the doing of it. The thing that was specifically human was the not stopping. The thing that was specifically human was the small, careful hand of a man writing in a notebook at a kitchen table for 46 years' worth of nights, and the small, careful hand of a woman writing in the same notebook for 11 months, and then, for the rest of her life, neither of them louder than the wind in the juniper, neither of them faster than the snow coming down, neither of them ever stopping. The others, when they came an answer came an answer to that. They are still answering. They will be answering. Maryam thinks on the clear nights with the cold tea on the bare ground beside her, and the leather notebook open on her lap for a very long time. She writes it down. She writes all of it down. She writes it in the neat hand her husband taught her, and underneath the last entry of each night, she writes the same small line because she has not been able to stop writing it and she has decided not to try. We are here. We are here. She underlines here every time, 3 times.